I had always loved my job as a pizza delivery boy. It was a simple gig, one that paid the bills and allowed me to cruise around the city in my beat-up car, listening to my favorite tunes. But one fateful night, my routine delivery took a terrifying turn that I'll never forget. I was 22 years old, fresh out of college, and had been working part-time as a pizza delivery driver to make ends meet while I figured out my next move in life. It was a chilly, moonless night, and the clock had just struck midnight as I received an order for a large pepperoni pizza to be delivered to an address I'd never been to before. I punched the address into my GPS, and it led me to a seemingly abandoned building in a quiet part of town. My instincts immediately tingled with unease as I parked my car in front of the dimly lit entrance. The building had an eerie vibe, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls that seemed to tell stories of a forgotten past. I grabbed the pizza box and cautiously approached the entrance. My footsteps echoed in the empty street, adding to the ominous atmosphere. As I reached the entrance, I noticed that the door was ajar, which was unusual for a delivery. My gut told me something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Hesitating for a moment, I decided to call the number listed on the order to confirm that this was indeed the correct address. A raspy voice on the other end confirmed it was, and they urged me to come inside and bring the pizza to apartment 303. Red flags were now waving frantically in my mind. I pushed the door open cautiously and stepped inside the dark and musty hallway. The faint hum of a flickering light bulb overhead was my only source of illumination. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I climbed the rickety stairs to the third floor, I couldn't ignore the increasing sense of dread. The hallway on the third floor was even darker, with peeling wallpaper and a peculiar smell that made my stomach churn. Apartment 303 was at the end of the hallway, its door partially open. I approached the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I knocked gently and announced that I had the pizza, but there was no response. My instincts were now screaming at me to leave, but I needed to make sure everything was okay. So, I pushed the door open slowly. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single candle, casting eerie shadows on the walls. There was a table set for one, with an empty chair facing away from me. A feeling of dread washed over me as I realized that I was alone in the room. Suddenly, a voice from behind the chair whispered, "Put the pizza on the table, and don't turn around." My heart raced, and I did as I was told. I could feel someone's presence behind me, and the situation had escalated from unsettling to downright terrifying. I knew I had to get out of there. Without thinking, I made a split-second decision. I bolted for the door, not looking back, and ran down the dark hallway and down the creaky stairs. The adrenaline coursing through my veins fueled my escape. Back in my car, I dialed the non-emergency number and reported the strange encounter. The police arrived at the abandoned building shortly after, but by then, the apartment was empty. The eerie room had been abandoned, and there was no sign of the person who had been lurking there. I may never know what truly happened that night, but one thing was certain: following my instincts and getting out of that eerie situation had been the best decision of my life. It was a chilling experience that would forever remind me to trust my gut and stay safe on those late-night pizza deliveries. I remember that night like it was yesterday, a chilling and unsettling experience that still sends shivers down my spine. It was my third week working as a pizza delivery driver, and while I had encountered my fair share of strange customers and odd situations, nothing could have prepared me for what happened that evening. I was just 20 years old at the time, eager to earn some extra cash during my college years. The pizza shop I worked for was known for its late-night deliveries, and I was assigned to take a rather peculiar order. It was a Friday night, and I had just finished a delivery to a group of rowdy college students. My phone buzzed with a new order, and I glanced at the screen to see the address, 456 Elm Street. I knew Elm Street well, a quiet residential area with cozy houses lined up along the tree-covered street. But 456 Elm Street? That address didn't ring a bell. I shrugged it off, thinking it must be a new customer or perhaps someone from out of town. Little did I know, this would be a night I would never forget. I arrived at the address a little past 11 p.m. The street was unusually quiet for a Friday night, and the houses on either side of the road were shrouded in darkness. My car's headlights illuminated the front of a decrepit house with a "For Sale" sign planted firmly on the overgrown lawn. That was my first red flag. The house was clearly vacant and had been foreclosed. I hesitated, debating whether to call the number on the order or just leave the pizza at the doorstep. But something about the situation felt off. It was too eerie, too unsettling. My instincts were screaming at me to be cautious. I decided to call the number. As I waited for someone to answer, I glanced around nervously. The house felt like it was watching me, and the darkness seemed to stretch infinitely into its depths. No response on the phone, just silence, adding to my growing unease. Suddenly, I heard a faint rustling from the bushes nearby. My heart raced as I turned towards the noise. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel someone watching me, lurking in the shadows. Panic surged through me. Without thinking, I left the pizza on the doorstep, jumped back into my car, and sped away from that sinister house as fast as I could. I called my boss as soon as I was a safe distance away, explaining what had just happened. He understood my concerns and assured me I had done the right thing. To this day, I can't say for sure what was going on at 456 Elm Street. Maybe it was a setup for a robbery, or perhaps just a sinister prank. The fact that the house was vacant only added to the mystery and creepiness of the situation. That night, I learned a valuable lesson: always trust your gut feeling when it comes to personal safety. It's better to be cautious and make a hasty retreat than to ignore your instincts and end up in a dangerous situation. And while I continued working as a pizza delivery driver, I made sure to share my experience with my coworkers, so they would also be prepared if they ever found themselves in a similar, spine-tingling situation. Being a pizza delivery guy, I've encountered my fair share of unusual situations, but one fateful night stands out from the rest. It was a chilly, pitch-black night, and I found myself on the final delivery of my shift. I pulled up to the given address, a decrepit house situated on the outskirts of town. The place resembled something straight out of a horror film, with its creaky floorboards and flickering porch lights. Despite the eerie atmosphere, I steeled myself and rang the doorbell. After a moment, a disheveled man in his 40s, with wild hair and torn clothing, answered the door. He had a look of utter bewilderment in his eyes, as if he had just weathered a storm. "Good evening, sir," I greeted him, attempting to maintain my composure. "Here's your pizza. That'll be $15.95. The man merely stared at me with a vacant expression. I extended the pizza box toward him, hoping he would snap out of whatever trance he was in and complete the transaction. But then, he started murmuring to himself, uttering words I couldn't quite discern. Suddenly, he lunged at me, clutching my arm with an unexpected grip of strength. Panic surged through me as I fought desperately to break free. His hold remained unyielding, and his gaze seemed to pierce right through me, as if he were seeing something beyond. "Let go!" I shouted, but my words fell on deaf ears. My heart pounded within my chest as I struggled to wrench myself away. Just as despair began to take hold, a neighbor from across the street, who must have observed the commotion, sprinted over. He firmly grasped the man's shoulders and pulled him away from me. "Are you all right?" he asked, genuine concern etched on his face. I was shaken but managed to stammer, I think so. "Thank you, sir." The neighbor then turned his attention to the disheveled man who had attacked me. "What's going on? Are you okay?" The man continued to mumble incoherently, his vacant gaze unchanged. The neighbor swiftly retrieved his phone and dialed the police, detailing the peculiar situation. As we awaited the arrival of law enforcement, the man grew increasingly agitated, pacing back and forth and muttering incomprehensibly. It became evident that there was a severe issue at hand. When the police finally arrived, they took control of the situation. It was later revealed that the man had a history of mental health problems and had been off his medication for several days. He was promptly transported to a nearby hospital for evaluation and treatment. I expressed my heartfelt gratitude to the neighbor for his courageous intervention and invaluable assistance. He downplayed his actions, stating that he had simply done what anyone should do when faced with such a circumstance.